Forget the price predictions for a moment. Because after reading through the XRP community over the last 24 hours, I realized something important. People aren't asking whether XRP can reach $10, $20, or even $100 anymore. They're asking something much more fundamental. What if the Clarity Act doesn't pass anytime soon? Does Ripple's entire strategy fall apart? Or has the market been looking at XRP the wrong way all along? That's the question we're going to answer today. Because if you've watched several XRP videos recently, you've probably noticed a common theme. Almost every bullish prediction eventually comes back to one idea: the Clarity Act. According to many analysts, once it passes, institutional money floods in, banks begin adopting XRP at scale, and the next major bull run begins. It sounds exciting, but here's the problem. What happens if the timeline changes? What happens if lawmakers take longer than expected? Does that suddenly mean Ripple stops growing? Does institutional adoption disappear overnight? Does everything Ripple has spent more than a decade building suddenly become worthless? I don't think so. And that's where I believe many investors are making a mistake. They're treating the Clarity Act as if it's the starting line, when in reality, it may simply be another accelerator for a process that's already underway. Let's look at the facts. While everyone has been focused on Washington, Ripple hasn't been standing still. The company has continued expanding internationally, securing regulatory approvals, building relationships with financial institutions, and growing its payment network across multiple regions. Those developments didn't happen because the United States suddenly became crypto-friendly. They happened because Ripple has been executing a global strategy for years. In fact, one of the biggest recent developments came from Europe, where Ripple received full regulatory authorization under the region's crypto framework. That means Ripple isn't waiting for permission to innovate everywhere. It's continuing to expand wherever regulatory clarity already exists. And that's an important distinction. The crypto market often acts as if only one country matters. But global finance doesn't work that way. Banks in Europe still move money. Financial institutions in Asia still process payments. Cross-border transactions happen every second, whether Congress passes another bill this month or 6 months from now. That's why I think the conversation around XRP needs to change. Instead of asking, will the Clarity Act make XRP successful, a better question is, what has Ripple already accomplished before the Clarity Act even exists? Because once you answer that question honestly, you begin seeing Ripple's strategy from a completely different perspective. Now let's answer what may be the biggest question in the XRP community right now. If Ripple keeps expanding around the world, why hasn't XRP's price responded the way many investors expected? It's a fair question, and honestly, it's one that frustrates a lot of long-term holders. Every few months we hear about another partnership, another regulatory approval, another institutional milestone, yet the price often seems to move far less than people hoped. That's exactly why some investors have started believing that none of these developments matter anymore. But here's what many people overlook. Business adoption and market pricing don't always move together. Think about how new technology spreads. A company doesn't invest millions of dollars into new infrastructure and then immediately transform an entire industry overnight. Adoption usually happens in stages. First comes research, then pilot programs, then testing, then limited deployment. Only after companies gain confidence do they begin expanding those systems across larger parts of their business. Financial institutions are no different. They're responsible for billions of dollars, regulatory compliance, and customer trust. That means every major decision moves much slower than the crypto market expects. And this is where I think many investors unintentionally create unrealistic expectations. Whenever a new Ripple announcement appears, social media immediately starts asking one question: when will the price explode? But institutions aren't thinking about tomorrow's price candle. They're asking different questions. Does this technology reduce costs? Can it improve settlement times? Does it fit within existing regulations? Can it integrate with our current systems? Those are the questions that determine whether real adoption happens. Another criticism I noticed was that many people are simply tired of hearing massive price predictions. Honestly, that's understandable. Nobody can accurately tell you where XRP will trade next month or next year. Markets don't work that way. Prices are influenced by liquidity, regulation, investor sentiment, macroeconomic conditions, and countless variables that nobody can predict with certainty. That's why I believe it's healthier to focus on measurable progress instead of dramatic forecasts. Ask yourself this instead: is Ripple expanding its regulatory footprint? Yes. Is Ripple continuing to work with financial institutions? Yes. Is Ripple still developing products for enterprise payments and digital assets? Yes. Those are facts that can actually be observed. Whether the market prices them in tomorrow or much later is an entirely different question. This also brings us back to the Clarity Act. If it passes, it could certainly remove uncertainty for many U.S. institutions and potentially make adoption easier. But if lawmakers need more time, does Ripple suddenly lose everything it has already built across Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and other global markets? Of course not. The strategy doesn't disappear. The relationships don't disappear. The technology doesn't disappear. At most, one part of the adoption timeline changes. And that's a very different conclusion from saying XRP's entire future depends on one single piece of legislation. So maybe the better question isn't whether the Clarity Act will decide XRP's future. Maybe the better question is whether Ripple has already been building the foundation that allows adoption to continue with or without one specific bill. So after looking at everything we've discussed today, I think the biggest mistake investors can make is believing that one single event will determine XRP's future. Whether it's the Clarity Act, one major partnership, one court ruling, or one headline, markets rarely work that way. Real adoption is usually the result of hundreds of smaller milestones coming together over time. And when you look at Ripple's journey over the past several years, that's exactly what stands out. The company has continued expanding into new markets, securing regulatory approvals, working with financial institutions, improving its payment infrastructure, and positioning itself where digital finance appears to be heading. None of those developments guarantee a specific XRP price, but together they paint a much bigger picture than any single news story ever could. That's why I think it's important to separate progress from predictions. Predictions create excitement. Progress creates value. One can disappear overnight. The other compounds over time. This is also why I wouldn't base my entire investment thesis on whether one bill passes this month or next year. If the Clarity Act eventually becomes law, it could certainly provide additional regulatory confidence for many institutions in the United States and potentially accelerate adoption. But if the legislative process takes longer than expected, that doesn't automatically erase everything Ripple has already built across Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, and other global markets. Those partnerships still exist. Those payment corridors still exist. The technology still exists. And perhaps most importantly, the demand for faster, cheaper, and more efficient cross-border payments hasn't disappeared. That's the trend worth watching. Instead of asking, will this bill make XRP successful? Maybe the better question is Ripple continuing to build a business that institutions may find valuable over the long term? Because if the answer to that question continues to be yes, then every new partnership, every regulatory approval, and every infrastructure upgrade becomes another piece of a much larger strategy rather than an isolated headline. The truth is, nobody knows exactly when the market will recognize that progress. Nobody knows when sentiment will shift, and nobody can honestly promise you where XRP will trade next month. But what we can do is follow the facts instead of the noise, watch adoption, watch regulation, watch institutional activity. Those are the indicators that tend to matter long after social media predictions have been forgotten. So I'd like to leave you with one final question. If the Clarity Act were delayed, but Ripple continued expanding globally, would that change your confidence in XRP? Or would you still believe the bigger story is unfolding behind the scenes? I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective, so leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this balanced XRP analysis and want updates that focus on facts instead of hype, be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next XRP update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.